I'm going to ask you to mute yourself just for background noise. And if you don't, I will. So if you do want to speak, please remember to unmute yourself. We'll have presentations from Public Works and Finance. And I would like to encourage you to ask questions throughout the meeting. You can get that going in the chat. You can put your physical hand up or your digital hand up, and we can ensure that there's space treated for you to express yourselves. I'm going to mute that. Okay, I would like to invite Patrick Graham, the Director of Engineering, to present on infrastructure updates. How are we doing, Patrick?
You see my screen?
Yes, there you go.
Okay. Some of this, we had a recently community information meeting with the Blue Water community. So some of this was presented there, but we've got a wider audience here, so we'll go over some of it again, and some of it would be new. Of course, we have the water system improvements project that's underway. We've hired a contractor, NB Contracting, for three projects. Two of them in the west side, the Bowen Bay well upgrades and system interconnection, which they'll be starting with, and the Blue Water water main replacements and culvert replacements will be next, and then they'll follow that work with work on the east side connecting Eagle Cliff and Cove Bay systems. So the Bowen Bay well upgrades and system interconnection, there's most of the shop drawings and reviews are completed. And for the critical path items that have long lead times, especially, that would include the electrical components such as the variable frequency drives, cabinets and kiosks, as well as the pumps. They have been ordered, so that the lead time on those items really drives the schedule for completion. NB has mobilized to Bowen. They haven't started installing the water mains yet. They've prepared a staging area on Ian Stewart's property. There's an area just off the road into that property that is going to be ultimately going to be a parking area. So that's going to be used. NB's made a arrangement with Ian to use that for staging area, which is very conveniently located. Once they're also going to be getting into the Blue Water Park, the new water mains and culvert replacements. They should be starting exploration work in mid-October to confirm bedrock extents and also the tie-in locations. End of September, should be end of October, they'll start work on the water mains. And we expect completion of that project to be in May to June of 2025. The schedule, there's a possibility the schedule may need to be extended depending on weather. The reason for that is it's important to construct the culverts during low flow conditions. So if we do have those conditions in the spring, then they'll be able to achieve the schedule that they've set out. And then there's a third component of the tender with NB is the Eagle Cliff Cove Bay connection that would be starting that in June and finishing towards the end of 2025. As we discussed previously with the Blue Water community, in order to fit within our available budget, there is some work that's been deferred. So one is there's two water mains on Captain's Way, the newer 150 millimeter main, and then the older 50 millimeter main. All of the connections should be on the 150 main, and there's a number of them, probably about 20, that need to be switched over. It doesn't impact fire flows on Captain's Way. The hydrants are all connected to the larger main. It does delay the decommissioning of the older 50 millimeter main, which is something we intend to do. We do plan to complete this in 2025, either by using any available project contingency as we get towards the end of their job. There's also, we've talked with BIM operations staff about taking on that work, which is, if we're not able to achieve that with project contingency, that's likely the route we'll take. The other component that was deferred is upgrading the connection between King Edward Bay and Bowen Bay. It's likely not needed for domestic flows. We expect that the domestic flows can be met with the existing connection. It would, of course, be needed for future upgrading of fire flows. And that's a much bigger project in that the Bowen Bay mains are undersized for that purpose and would need to be upgraded as well. We've also done, as required by Vancouver Coastal Health, we've completed GARP assessments for our municipal wells, and that stands for groundwater at risk of pathogens. It's looking at a number of risk factors for all of the wells, determining if they're at risk for pathogens from surface water or other sources. So we have confirmed that there is a GARP rating for the King Edward Bay and Bowen Bay wells. And so we're currently evaluating additional treatment required. It's likely that we need to add UV. That would be added in the King Edward Bay chlorination shed. And of course, that would also treat the Bowen Bay wells, which will be pumped to that treatment shed, and then up to the large reservoir in King Edward Bay. So this addition of the treatment is something that all the systems require, and so it would be a shared cost between Blue Water, King Edward Bay, and Bowen Bay. There was an issue that we discussed with the King Edward Bay community at a previous meeting, that one of the wells, TW01, it was taken out of service earlier in 2024 due to high turbidity. Investigations of that issue that revealed that the causes to be a degraded discharge pipe. It had a hole in it right near the pump. And then the pump that was installed there was quite a bit overpowered for the sustainable yield of that well. So those issues have been resolved. A new pump has been installed and a new discharge pipe. And that well is now back in service. And all of the wells in King Edward Bay, as well as the other systems, are fully functional. I should also mention that in parallel with this, Ian Stewart's development is proceeding. They're working on getting the well that he's drilled, which is a good well, bringing that online to support his development as well as the Blue Water system. So that's and we had some other more minor issues. We had a couple of service line and water main leaks in Bowen Bay that had to be repaired. That was done by operations staff. But that's really the main issues that we're dealing with on the Westside systems. I'm happy to take any questions if you have them.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I see a question from Melissa Callahan.
Sorry, it's actually Rick.
Oh, hi, Rick.
Melissa's voice hasn't changed. Just for clarity, one of the deferred items was the connection between Bowen Bay and King Edward Bay. Is that the line that's feeding into the tank at the top of Arbutus Ridge, or is that a different connection?
No, the line that's feeding into the line that will feed into the King Edward Bay tank is to be installed. They'll be starting that next week. So they'll be installing a 3-inch line from that goes from the Bowen Bay wells to the King Edward Bay chlorination shed. And then there's already a fill line from the chlorination shed up to the King Edward Bay tank. So that will enable the Bowen Bay wells to pump into the King Edward Bay tank. The connection that I was referring to is for distributing water from the tank back to the Bowen Bay system.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Patrick, it is Melissa actually here now, and I just had a follow-up question. We're just sort of tag teaming here. What's the cost of the water treatment? What's that sort of expected to come in at?
Probably in the 60 to 70,000 range. We assuming we don't have to upgrade the structure. The we have determined there's likely enough space within the existing shed to accommodate UV treatment, and if it's ever required, filtration as well. VCH has indicated that filtration that we would be given an exemption from filtration requirements based on the results of our GARP assessments.
And what's the timeline for getting that installed, or do we have a deadline?
We don't have a specific deadline. VCH has been pretty good about being flexible with us, recognizing that we're a small jurisdiction and we have a lot of needs with our 7 different water systems. Having said that, it's probably most efficient and cost effective to do that work in conjunction with the work that's happening now on the Bowen Bay well and interconnection project. So it's likely that we would be doing that on the same time frame. So between now and next spring, early summer.
I have a question.
Okay.
In regards to the UV system for upgrade, I understood that King Edward Bay had a UV integrated with the chlorine system for makeup into the storage tank. So the new UV system, what, like you said, 60 to 70,000 or $6,000 to $7,000?
No, probably more like 60,000.
For a new UV system?
Well, there is a UV system on the Arbutus Ridge well.
Yeah.
That well has got its own treatment shed with chlorination, UV, and filtration.
So the new water system treatment coming into play is including the chlorination with UV and filtration.
Not filtration, it would be adding UV to the existing chlorination shed at King Edward Bay.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around $60,000 for a UV system. What kind of flow rate would be required? Is what you're targeting?
I'm not sure about the numbers. It would be the maximum flow rate probably the maximum flow rate we'd be getting from the Bowen Bay wells when they're pumping up to the tank.
That'd be into a combined pipe going up to the tank, and that's what the UV would be installed on. Is that 3-inch line?
Well, it would be installed in the shed, so it would capture all the wells that pump up to the tank, all the King Edward Bay wells, and all the Bowen Bay wells.
I see.
So it's more efficient, obviously, than doing
Yep.
UV for each well individually, which is what a lot of our systems have. So there is some efficiency in having the system combined in this way.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm just trying to figure out the $60,000 to $70,000 for a UV.
Well, if it's not that much, then that's great. I just
Okay.
don't want to throw out numbers that are too low.
Too low. Understood. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. I've got Allard next for a question.
Hi, thanks. Hi, Patrick. Hi, everyone from BIM and Alison Morse, counselor. Thanks for attending. I have just a question around the well repair for TW01 in King Edward Bay. Is that reflective of, and I apologize for this being a financial question, but is that the 28,000 that's reflected on our statement? And then the second part of the question is,
yeah.
does that get shared? Does that 28,000 get shared with Blue Water as the co-shared usage of the well is
No.
what's been happening there?
Yeah, that sounds about right. That's probably what you're seeing. And my understanding is that all of the capital expenditures in King Edward Bay are currently shared with Blue Water through the formula for cost sharing that's currently in place, which we of course do need to revisit once this project is completed.
And then the cost sharing for the volume that King Edward Bay distributes to Blue Water, that comes into the financials at the end of the year? Like, is there a specific time when you capture that, or?
Yep, it's done as a year-end adjusting entry. We have to wait until all the costs are in and then we divvy them back out.
Great. Can I ask one more question that's financially related that sort of stuck out to me between the three water LSAs? King Edward Bay's legal costs seem disproportionately high. I'm just trying to understand the reason for that. I think we're like $5,400 a year, and the others are, a third of that.
It's am I on? Oh yeah, it's a combination of legal, insurance, and audit. So your insurance costs are higher because your insured values are higher for the assets that you have.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Kristen. I've got questions from John and Lisa O'Donnell from Bowen Bay.
Thank you. Just some old history, but the tank that's at the very top of Malkin Creek Road, will that tank remain functional after the interconnection? In other words, is water pumped up to that tank and then it drains across to King Edward Bay, so there's always water flow in that tank?
It would remain connected to the Bowen Bay system. We're not planning to decommission the tanks. So the normal operation would be water would be coming from the King Edward Bay tank and distributing to all three systems. We would have the ability to revert back to the way that to Bowen Bay operating as a standalone system if we ever needed to. So the tanks won't be an integral part of the operation, but they'll remain there, and they will remain just by pushing water into the Bowen Bay system. Those tanks will fill up.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just more thinking of firefighting capacity, because that tank is available for extra water should there be a large need. But if it's not got a flow in it all the time, then when it is used, it would contaminate the system down below.
Yeah, it will have continuous flow into it from the well, ultimately from the wells. They'll be going up to the King Edward Bay tank, pushing back out into the Bowen Bay system. Since the tanks are connected to the system, you would have water turning over in those tanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Does anyone else have any questions for the Director of Engineering before we move on to consumption?
I guess I got one, Steph.
Okay, Rob?
Circling back to John's question about the Bowen Bay water tanks, they're considerably lower elevation than the tank in King Edward Bay, so it's going to have some sort of a shut off when it's full, right? How are you going to handle that?
Yeah, I don't think we will need a shut off. The amount of water that's being pulled into the Bowen Bay system will be governed by the demand in the system. So if all of a sudden nobody's using any water, you won't have water flowing into the system. But if it's being pulled out by, whatever the usage is, that will drive the flow coming into the system.
Yeah,
Okay.
I understand that, but when you have two tanks storing water interconnected at different elevations, they're going to equal out. It's the same as the King Edward Bay tank and the Blue Water tank, they equal out. And those are predominantly at the same elevation, though.
Yeah.
And there was an issue in the past where the King Edward Bay tank was set at an elevation slightly lower than the Blue Water. So 40% of the Blue Water tank was never able to be filled to capacity because of that. So there had to be some equipment installed so that you could always maintain full capacity of the Blue Water tank as the Blue Water wells pumped into it.
Yeah. I'll have to circle back with our design engineers and put this question to them. There wasn't we've been told that upgrades or additional valves and infrastructure at the Bowen Bay tanks aren't necessary. So I'm going to have to check with them on that one.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Annette, do you want to give us a quick overview of consumption and water quality?
Yes, sure. The annual drinking water report is published on the BIM website. You can find the link in your agenda, and all the supporting information is linked on that same page as well. It's published every year around July for the previous year after it's been reviewed together with Vancouver Coastal Health. The required sample frequency was met for all water systems, for all of the 3 Westside water systems, and all samples were free of E. coli. In Blue Water, there was one sample found in one instance that contained total coliform. In that case, the drinking water officer gets in touch with me immediately when the lab result is received, and is discussed with the operations manager and also the operator who took the sample. If it is determined that there is no water leak in the system and no operations error had occurred before, and the chlorine residuals are at least 0.2 ppm, it is determined that it was an error in sampling at the sample tap or when handling the sample bottle. The result the following week of that positive sample was good, was negative, and so no further action was required. Feel free to read through the report and supporting documentation and send me any questions that you may have to water@bimbc.ca or give us a call. I also have put together consumption graphs for the 3 Westside systems that show consumption for a whole year. Just sharing my screen quickly here. These graphs here show consumption per connection. So each bar represents one connection in each system. The average annual consumption in King Edward Bay was about 27,000 imperial gallons per connection. The daily average consumption in King Edward Bay was 73. That is a little lower than the average combined of all other municipal water systems, which is at 84. In comparison, Bowen Bay's average consumption was about 26,000 imperial gallons per connection, or 71 gallons per day. And surprisingly, here in Blue Water, in this time period between July 2023 to July 2024, the consumption, the average per connection was a little higher with 30,400 imperial gallons, or a daily average of 83 imperial gallons. This is likely to two major leaks that had occurred in this period in the system that brought up the numbers. In previous years, when the average was calculated, blue water was typically a little lower. Are there any questions?
Okay, I'm not seeing any. The chat. Nope.
Can I just ask one question?
Yeah, of course. Please go ahead, Brian.
I'm just looking at this data. When I looked at it previously, I wondered whether we were talking about a summation of the the consumption at the point of connection, or was this the I wonder if it is compared to the total consumption of the whole local service area.
This shows per connection the consumption.
Right. So do we have figures somewhere about the amount of water that is distributed within each of the service areas without reference to individual connections, but the water that was flowing into the Blue Water, King Edward Bay, Bowen Bay? Do we have that information?
Yes, we have that information too, but I haven't not put it together for this meeting specifically.
It would be helpful to see that information, if that's possible.
Yeah, it can be provided, certainly, yeah.
Well, I'd be grateful if you do that, Annette. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Annette, it's Rob Duffy.
Yes.
Going back to, I guess, Brian's ask, and you confirmed that this average daily consumption was based on a connection rate, but how does that factor in if there's a leak in the mains, but you're calculating these quantities off of the metered connections?
Those were, I apologize if I said main. I meant there was a leak in the service line in a couple of instances in this case.
Okay, so service lines from the main into a property.
Yeah.
Okay, so after the meter.
Yes.
Okay.
And then Allard wanted to follow up.
Hello, Annette. I have one more question as a follow-up to Brian's comments.
Yep.
It would be very helpful to have the total volume of water distributed from King Edward Bay to Bowen Bay, and then in addition, the total number of blue water consumption per connection totals, which you already have, because then we can see if there are leaks, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks.
And Allard, there is meters on the mains from King Edward Bay to Blue Water, so they can do a full calculation of how much water is moving over.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
That historical data would be very helpful to have too. And
yes, I can put that together and
that's very helpful, Annette. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. This is Lisa, back to your sample. It takes a week of between, when you've got a sample and you have to do an assessment as to whether or not there is a concern.
No,
that seems like a long time.
No, it's not a week. It's samples are taken weekly, and so currently we are taking the samples on Monday. They're sent into the city on Tuesday, and if there is a bad result, I usually get a phone call on Wednesday. Yeah, it's fairly quick.
And then you do a follow-up, and it takes how long between that follow-up? So if you've got a sample that has some sort of a concern,
yeah,
that could be a potential health risk. If that's where I'm going.
That's why it's discussed right away with the coastal health officer and the operations manager and the operator who took the sample. And if there is no reason determined that could have caused an actual contamination within the system, then it's assumed it's an error at the sample tab or at the bottle that had happened when sampling the water. And if that is the case, it's not usually resampled the same week, but it's just checked that the chlorine residuals are high enough to take care of any potential contamination. And then we look specifically that the sample the next week is negative. But if there is any sort of concern that there is actual contamination happening in the system, it would be resampled the same week. And this is decided by the drinking water officer at Coastal Health.
Okay, so it's Coastal Health that makes that decision, not?
Yes, that's not
Okay.
us, it's Coastal Health.
Thank you.
Okay, great questions for Annette. Thank you, Annette. I'm going to move us on. It's to Kristen.
I think there is one more. Yeah.
Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
I'm sorry to there's just a couple of quick ones that you might be able to deal with very quickly, and I just want to clarify one matter that seemed to have two answers that didn't quite gel, and that's to do with the deferred King Edward Bay and Bowen Bay link line. That's being deferred, but Patrick, if I understood you well, you said that that there would be a line established between Bowen Bay and King Edward Bay. We've always had a line that's gone from King Edward Bay to Bowen Bay, but not the other way around. And we've been anxious to change that so that our wells can be protected. So I just wonder if you could clarify, will there be a line that will effectively protect the wells in King Edward Bay by having some flow from Bowen Bay? Is that right?
Yeah, that's the whole purpose of this
Indeed,
interconnection
that's what I
project.
thought, and hence I was a bit surprised when it came up in the deferred work matter.
No, there is a connection
If you're,
that allows water to flow from King Edward Bay to Bowen Bay, and that will remain in place. The deferred work is referring to making that a larger connection. There will be a new line that connects the Bowen Bay wells to the King Edward Bay tank. So
that
all
is
of the
going to happen,
water.
and that's not deferred. That
No,
part is not,
that's a key part of the project. It can't
yeah,
get
excellent.
deferred.
Good. I'm sorry that
Okay.
and what the one second, thank you for that, Patrick. The second point, small one, is that I understand that the cost issue is usefully arranged around proportions. I know you're thinking about that, but am I right in thinking that the proportionate costs as distributed for various capital things are going to be based on connections, the use of water at connections? That's where it's measured. Whereas it would be more usefully determined by the amount of water at the not at the connections, but the flow into each of the areas. That's why the historical information is very useful to us. So I wanted to know whether or not the proportionate costs are determined by the various relative costs of the water used at connections or in whole service areas.
It's used in whole service areas.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thanks, Kristen.
Okay, well, with that, let's get Kristen on stage with her financial statements.
Thank you very much. I will just take a moment to share some information with you so you can follow along with where I'm at. And if you hear a little sound in the background, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with one of my ports and it's blipping on and off, so I apologize. Okay, so I trust you are looking at my screen, which is a Blue Water Park water statement of operations and capital expenditures.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll start with the financial results for Blue Water. These numbers here in blue are the 2023 actual year-end financial statement figures. These numbers here in green are just for information, sort of year-to-date where we're at. They're not audited as yet. They're just year-to-date figures. So looking at last year's revenues, the user rate revenue came in very close or over actually budget. That comes from some of the high users, the additional rates charged to them. Our interest on reserves was higher than budgeted. I do like to be very conservative when it comes to investment income. So anything over is kind of like a gift. Because the work did start last year on the design and had some expenditures on the project, 162,000 of capital expenditures there on the project. Before we went ahead and finalized and initiated any transfers from the authorized loan. At year end, what I did was I did do a little transfer from the general fund into Blue Water to help offset those costs. If I didn't do that, then what I would have had to do would have been to just absolutely drain the Blue Water Park reserve fund. I didn't want to do that. So we just did a little temporary transfer of $100,000 from general fund into Blue Water in order to offset those costs. And you'll see it was repaid back here in 2024. So typically we do a transfer every year of about just over $6,000 for an allocation of administrative overhead to the Blue Water Park water system. And then we've increased it by 100,000 in order to recapture that temporary loan that we posted last year. Looking at the expenses from last year, the wages came in quite under, and that's because we hadn't settled our collective agreement with our union staff in 2023 as we had expected. The good news on that is that we've just recently settled in the month of September. So those costs we will be showing up in 2024 as the retro payments are made. Most of the other costs, for the most part, came in quite online. There was some extraordinary costs here in repairs and maintenance. It was some consulting fees to paid to Urban Systems, about $15,000 that weren't part of the capitalized project expenses. Then I charged them off to operations. So the reserve fund in Blue Water, we had expected to spend quite a bit more, of course, on the capital project last year, but it just didn't proceed ahead as quickly as we thought. So the reserve fund started out with about $91,000 in it, finished the year with 162, of course, given that injection from the general fund. So we expect then next year that that the fund will have some money sitting in there because of the loan that we now have that we've that we've started to draw upon now in order to fund those capital expenditures. So I can move on to King Edward Bay and talk about the expenses in that water system, or if there's anybody from Blue Water Park that had any questions. Do you see anything, Steph?
I'm not seeing any hands, so let's carry on.
Okay, King Edward Bay, same thing. The revenue figures came in just a little bit over budget, which is good. We made our revenue target for the year. Interest, I was a little over exuberant with the interest budget for King Edward Bay for 2023, and it only came in at 3198, unfortunately. Transfers from other water fund. This is where the annual transfer for in respect of operating expenditures from Blue Water Park to King Edward Bay happens. So $44,000 was transferred from Blue Water Park into King Edward Bay. If I go back up to Blue Water Park, you can see this same offsetting transfer in the expense items down here. So those two things kind of match and offset each other. Salaries and benefits, again, the same pattern of the collective agreement that has not been settled but was recently settled. Allard, you brought up a question about insurance costs in King Edward Bay. I hope that I addressed that adequately for you. There are higher property insurance payments for the higher value of the net assets in the King Edward Bay, so they are insured for a higher value. Utilities came in under, at the end of the year, just over $60,000 was contributed to the King Edward Bay Reserve Fund. So we opened this year with $204,000 in reserve. You did note correctly the expenditure here year to date in King Edward Bay relates to all of that pump work that was done. I can take any questions with regards to King Edward Bay if anybody has some.
don't see anything. Oh, I see Allard. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. And so the 28K, that's the end of the invoicing from the operator to repair the well. Or is there any more
I
with?
believe that's the end. That bill actually was just paid in September, so it's pretty recent. I do believe that's it.
Great. And then to your earlier comment, the 44,582 that was transferred from other waterfront or Blue Water Park, that was
That's it.
based on the total metric water, not the individual usage.
No, it's total water consumed within the Blue Water Park service area as a proportion of
So
total
it's
water produced in King Edward Bay.
right. And so it's not based on the amount of water that's transfers the line, it's the amount of
No.
water that's used by the consumers.
It's total water transferred, total net water transferred from King Edward Bay to Blue Water Park.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you, Allard. Melissa's got a question.
Yeah, apologies, Kristen, if this is sort of already published information, but what is the cost sharing formula? Like, what is that calculation, and how often is that revisited?
It has not been revisited since it was developed initially. So the total cost to produce water in King Edward Bay are gathered and measured. The total water production is measured in King Edward Bay, and the proportionate amount of water production that is transferred into the Blue Water Park local area service is that proportionate share of operating actual costs and budgeted contributions to reserve funds. That proportionate share is transferred back to the King Edward Bay system from the Blue Water Park system.
And is there an actual formula for that?
So it's actual production.
Yep.
Proportionate of that production which went to Blue Water Park. So let's say that 60% of the water produced in King Edward Bay ended up being transferred to Blue Water Park. Then 60% of King Edward Bay's actual operating costs and 60% of the budgeted contributions to reserve funds would be added up. And that amount of money is transferred from Blue Water Park into King Edward Bay.
Okay, thank you.
It's a great explanation, Kristen.
Yeah, thank you.
I've got a question from Lisa and John O'Donnell.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. A Bowen Bay question about King Edward Bay. When the systems are more amalgamated after the current work is done, is this transfer system between Blue Water and King Edward Bay going to remain? And is there going to be a transfer system of water transferred from Bowen Bay to other water systems?
That's the $1 million question, John, and that's what we're still working out in our financial model. So we're doing that work right now, and we will have that ready, what our proposed plan is for bringing that to the committee of the whole meeting with council. I expect it will be February.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. That is the end of the King Edward Bay financial. I'm not seeing any more questions. Go on to Bowen Bay.
Thanks. Bowen Bay, very same pattern again that you're seeing, with just a little bit higher revenue than was actually put in the budget. Same pattern with the salaries. Again, that's related to the contract negotiations. Supplies and services, those items are typically small supplies that are purchased on behalf of all water systems and are allocated out based on a distribution formula. They're all very small things that that can't really be attributed one by one to any particular water system. So we do kind of bulk purchases for small fittings and couplings and things like that. And we do distribute them out. Now, in some years, Garrett will do a mass purchase of a bit of a large stock so that he always makes sure that he has those in stock and he's not running to town all the time to pick things up. So I suspect that's part of why we have that sort of large supply line item that's showing up in 2023 across all of the water systems. The utilities expense a little bit higher than what we'd kind of thought. So that is something that we'll have to add to the budget next year and make sure that we provision adequately for that. Bowen Bay ended up transferring just over $30,000 to the reserve fund last year. So starting the reserve fund at 168, there was no additional drawdowns for any capital expenditures in Bowen Bay in 2023. So the reserve fund is now sitting at about almost $200,000. And just looking at expenditures in Bowen Bay, I don't have anything that is jumping out at me that's unusual. You do see our salaries are trending like less than where we would expect to see them at September 30th. But once that that retro union payment in regards to the collective agreement hits the books, it should hit the books at the end of October. That'll kind of catch up and it will trend much more closer to where we should be at this part in the year.
Sorry, John, is that your hand up for now or from before?
That's a new hand.
Okay.
Uh,
How many hands?
yes.
How many fingers?
Yeah. Don't count the fingers. So looking ahead, I guess what we're not being presented now is the budget for next year or the proposed
yet.
water rates.
No, we will be looking at that in February.
Okay, so that's.
Are you still there?
Is he glitched?
Yeah. Some of
Okay,
the next
maybe-
steps that we're working on for approval is getting council to sign off on our utility allocation policy of our admin costs. So what we've been doing, and this is a model just for demonstration purposes, really. But what we do is we take a portion of our administrative costs amongst all of the water systems. So for example, we do operate a facility. Oh, I see Allard has his hand up. I'm happy to stop and you can ask your question.
Don't stop.
Oh, okay. For example, we have a facility work yard that we run and several of our utility operating staff, all of our utility operating staff operate out of their storage of tools, equipment, that kind of thing there. So we do take a portion of the operating costs there and we transfer those out to water systems. We have annual audit fees that we pay each year. Those are up around $85,000 a year. So based on a percentage of the revenue that we are bringing in on behalf of water systems, what we do is allocate about 25% of our audit fees out to the water systems. Also our insurance liability premium through the Municipal Insurance Authority. Again, we do the same thing. We allocate a portion of that cost directly to water systems. So then once we've determined what portion of the costs that we're looking at to distribute to water systems, we then allocate all of those equitably among the water systems by charging them based on a proportionate share based on the number of connections in each system. So as you can see, we have total estimated connections of 1304 and approximately half of those are in Cove Bay. So pretty much just over half of all of our administrative costs are allocated directly to Cove Bay and proportionately among each of the other water systems. So effectively what you have across all water systems, doesn't matter if you're in Eagle Cliff or if you're in Cove Bay, if you're in King Edward Bay, you're still, as a user, you're still paying the exact same cost per connection per person for the annual audit fees. Then what else do we have? Oh, then we also do a little bit here with regards to things like funding for the big assets. So vehicle replacement, our fleet assets and things. If we estimate that we have 4 dedicated water trucks, we estimate their annual, expected useful life to be about 8 years. We estimate a replacement cost for those vehicles at about $50,000 per truck. So every year we do a transfer from the water systems of $25,000, contribute that into the equipment maintenance fund. And that way, when it comes time to buy new trucks, we have the money there in our equipment fleet replacement fund. And we just charge them off and we fund them 100% through the general fund. Because from an accounting perspective, all of the accounts for each of the systems are kept very separate. It's really difficult for us to start purchasing assets that are shared and charging portions of assets to each of the funds. So that's why we do it this way. And we just transfer the money into the equipment fund and we purchase those vehicles when needed. And we don't charge the water systems at the time those vehicles, those assets are purchased. I'm happy to take any questions about our administrative allocation policy. This is what is something that's being developed, and I'll be taking that to council just to get their sign off on that. It's informally what we've been doing for several years, and I think it's time that we just run that by council and get them to just understand how we've been accounting for the water systems and how we've been ensuring that the administrative costs are allocated equitably among all of the 7 systems. Any?
Allard has, I think the yellow hand is on.
Is it the same hand from all the time?
Sure.
Put it down and run it back up.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen, for that fulsome explanation. I appreciate that very much. And I have a question. As we're dealing with stratas at King Edward Bay, we're having to deal with depreciation reports, et cetera. And I'm leading that to a question about our reserve fund at King Edward Bay. Is that do we have sufficient reserve funds for depreciation, et cetera? And are you satisfied with that, or what's the objective? Like how much more do we need to be secure in our needs for depreciation and replacement costs?
I can tell you we are making some marked improvement and progress on our asset management plans. We also have a new CAO who has started with us at the municipality. His name is Kieran Dillon. I don't think he's in the meeting tonight, but he does come from engineering. He's a professional engineer, so he will be very much leading the charge on making the completion of our asset management plan a priority for the municipality. So with that completion, the depreciation reports in a strata corporation very much mirror what an asset management plan is. How much money do you have to put aside in order to replace an asset when it gets to its end of its useful life? So with that as being moved up higher on a priority with this council, I can assure you that a significant amount of efforts on the part of Patrick and myself are now going to be dedicated to moving that asset management plan along. When that is completed, or when we've made additional progress on it, that piece that informs, do we have the right level of reserves? That piece and the answer to your question, do we have enough level of reserves, becomes a much more informed decision with the support of that asset management plan behind us.
Great. Yeah. So liability insurance refers to liability insurance only.
Nothing
else.
Insurance. Oh, in this allocation distribution. So there are 2 components to the insurance. There's the actual property insurance. So that is what you see in your financial statement as included in that legal insurance. And yes, another piece of it is an allocated distribution of the liability premium that the municipality pays overall. So there's 2 components to that.
So if there were an event like an earthquake or a fire and damage to the system was created, that would be self-insured.
No, it's covered in the
In other
property
words,
insurance. There are
it is
some
covered,
assets
okay.
that are not insurable. So water lines buried beneath the road are not insurable. Buried water lines, things above ground can be insured, and everything that we have above the ground is certainly included in our property list of assets. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Allard. John's got a question. You're back.
Yeah, I'm back. I don't know what happened. We lost the signal. Jumping back, sorry, to the Bowen Bay. So our contribution to the reserves, it's quite a bit higher this year than we had anticipated. Is that correct?
The contribution to your reserve ends up being all unspent revenues. So if your expenses are under what we budgeted, then all of that savings goes into your reserve. So your budget for 2023 was almost 21,000 contribution to reserves. With the savings from operations expenses and the little extra in revenues, it ended up that you were able to contribute just over 30,000 to reserves.
See, because looking ahead, I guess we got to plant the seeds for the your approach to council.
Yeah.
The question is, if we are contributing more than we are needing or had planned to, will there be an opportunity to reduce rates for next year? And I presume you're going to be looking at the rates. Maybe they're going to be different between the three different water systems, because of course the Blue Water people eventually would be kicking in quite a bit of money for their new system. And it'd be silly to base their rates on our cost, for instance.
I look at your reserve level at 198,000. I'm not seeing any extra money in there. I think that's quite low. And so from that perspective, I don't anticipate that we'll be able to lower water rates in the near future. $200,000 doesn't cover very much if you have to replace a water main or fix something. It really doesn't go very far.
Okay, and just one last thing, I guess not my business, but Allard was asking about the depreciation report relative to the water system.
Yeah.
And the strata. But I think the strata doesn't own the water system, do they, Allard? So it doesn't have to show in your report.
No, he was just using that as an example.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Good clarification, John. Thanks for that. Does anyone else have a question for our CFO at 7:01? This has been very informative. Okay, I'm going to just do a quick little spiel about communication. As you know, we were trying to enhance the robustness of our engagement. So we have these committee information meetings. We're also going to have a meeting with all the council members in February for the budget reviews of the water systems. That'll be a committee of the whole. We've got our information pages. It's it's linked to the agenda. I'm assuming you're all on the mailing list, our news email list. If not, or tell your friends, you can subscribe. The link is on our agenda. It's also at the bottom of our homepage. And we have an email address. It's water@bimbc.ca. So you get the CFO, the Director of Engineering, the Manager of Utilities Operations, the Utilities Coordinator, all on that email. So any question you have regarding your water system, please just email us at water@bimbc.ca. Okay. Thank you very
Amazing.
much.
7 o'clock on the nose.
We did it. Thank you so much for all your questions and engagement. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.